The chandeliers glittered like stars caught inside crystal cages, casting golden light across the endless halls of the Blackwood estate. Adrian Blackwood stood at the center of it all, perfectly tailored in a suit that cost more than most families earned in a year, a glass of aged scotch in his hand, and a smile practiced enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. To the business world, he was a visionary, a man who had turned ruthless ambition into an empire. To the circles of high society, he was the charming host, the man whose name meant power, whose money opened doors. Yet beneath that polished exterior was a man who measured people in terms of usefulness, a man who carried ice in his veins and considered kindness a weakness he would never allow himself. Outside the estate, sleek cars gleamed in the driveway, symbols of wealth. Adrian paraded like trophies. Inside, the mansion smelled of polished wood, imported cigars, and the faint trace of expensive perfume from gatherings where politicians, bankers, and rivals all fell prey to his charisma. Guests who attended his dinners admired his wit, envied his wealth, and whispered about his flawless life. They saw a devoted husband and soon-to-be father, a man who had it all. But their admiration was built on illusions, carefully staged smiles, and a performance Adrian played to perfection. Elena, his wife, was the hidden truth behind that facade. She drifted silently through those marble halls, her hand often pressed against her growing stomach, her beauty understated but radiant. Where Adrian was sharp edges and ambition, she was soft grace and quiet strength. She greeted the servants with warmth, spoke gently, and carried herself with dignity even as loneliness gnawed at her. To outsiders, she was envied. Married to one of the wealthiest men in the city, living in a palace. But behind the walls of glass and gold, Elena felt the weight of chains no one could see. She was not a partner to Adrian but an ornament, displayed when needed, dismissed when not. Adrian's gaze lingered on her belly, not with affection but irritation. The child she carried was, to him, nothing more than an inconvenience, a disruption to his carefully ordered life. When guests congratulated him on fatherhood, he smiled for them, but once alone, his words to Elena were cold, sharp, dismissive. He did not see a future, only an obstacle. And though Elena tried to cradle hope in her heart, she felt, with each passing day, more like a prisoner in a gilded cage. Selina arrived like a spark meant to set fire to everything it touched. She was striking, raven-haired, her lips always curved in a knowing smile, and her presence wrapped in confidence that dared anyone to look away. In Adrian's world of wealth and restraint, she was chaos disguised as allure, whispering poison in the sweetest tones. She didn't just exist in his life, she invaded it, claimed it, and reminded him every chance she got that she was not satisfied with being kept in the shadows. She wanted more, his name, his fortune, his empire. And she knew the one obstacle standing between her and everything she desired was the quiet woman who bore his child. In the dim glow of Adrian's private study, Selina leaned against his desk, swirling the wine in her glass, her voice smooth as velvet. "She weakens you, Adrian. Can't you see it? You're meant for greatness, and yet you let yourself be tied down by her tears and that unborn burden." Her words dripped into him like poison, validating the thoughts he already tried to bury. She made Elena sound small, fragile, a weight dragging him down when he should be soaring higher. And Adrian, already weary of Elena's soft pleas for attention and the gentle reminders of a baby he didn't want, listened. Selina touched his arm, leaned close and whispered, "That child will ruin everything you've built. Do you want to watch it all crumble because of her?" Her eyes glinted with hunger, not just for him but for the empire she meant to share. She gave him no room for doubt, no pause for guilt. Her words were fire, and Adrian let them burn. Outsiders still saw him as the perfect husband, the soon-to-be father preparing for the next chapter of life. But behind closed doors, Selina was there, stoking his resentment, shaping his desires into something darker. Adrian's cold heart grew colder still, his thoughts twisting until the idea of freedom meant something unspeakable. And Selina smiled, because she knew she had planted the seed that would destroy Elena's world. Adrian sat in the leather armchair of his private club, the kind of place where power was bought and sold over cigars and aged whiskey. The walls smelled of oak and smoke, the room filled with men who owned companies, not jobs, men who thought themselves untouchable. He belonged here, sharp suit, watch glinting under the amber lights, expression unreadable as always. Yet behind that mask, his thoughts gnawed at him, circling back to the same conclusion he had been resisting. Selena's words echoed like a drumbeat. Elena was a weakness, the baby a burden. He swirled his glass, pretending to listen to the idle talk around him, but his mind drifted elsewhere, toward freedom. Freedom from Elena's soft eyes that made him feel accused without a word. Freedom from the child that would tie him down. Freedom from the image of a husband he never wanted to be. His empire demanded ruthlessness, not sentiment. And ruthlessness was something he had in abundance. That night, when the chatter faded and the shadows deepened, Adrian leaned across the table to a man he had known for years, a fixer of sorts, someone who always knew the kind of people who could solve problems permanently. "I need someone discreet," Adrian murmured, his voice low, almost casual. The man raised a brow but didn't ask questions. In this world, details were currency too dangerous to spend carelessly. He slipped Adrian a name, a number scribbled on a napkin, and with it, a path Adrian had secretly wanted. The meeting that followed was not in a club or mansion but in a dimly lit garage, reeking of oil and metal. Daniel Kane emerged from the shadows, broad-shouldered, scar across his jaw, eyes hard from battles fought in places Adrian could never imagine. He had once been a soldier, but war had left him untethered, drifting into the mercenary's life. Adrian studied him, saw the efficiency in his stance, the lack of hesitation in his gaze. This was a man who could end lives as easily as snuffing out a candle. "I want it done clean," Adrian said, his tone cool, rehearsed. "No mess, no loose ends. She disappears, and it looks like fate, not foul play." He named the sum, an obscene amount, enough to buy loyalty and silence. Daniel accepted with a nod, his expression unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. A shadow, a hesitation so quick Adrian missed it. The deal was struck. Adrian felt a twisted relief settle over him, as if he had solved an equation that had long tormented him. Elena's days were numbered, and he had paid to erase his greatest inconvenience. Daniel watched from the cover of his parked car, eyes trained on the tall iron gates of the Blackwood estate. He had studied targets before: politicians, crooked businessmen, men who had earned their deaths with blood and betrayal. But this was different. His orders were clear: follow Adrian Blackwood's wife, learn her schedule, wait for the moment when her life could be ended without suspicion. It should have been routine, but nothing about Elena Blackwood felt routine to him. Through the tall windows of the mansion, he saw her moving slowly, her hand pressed gently against her rounded stomach. She was not draped in jewels or arrogance as he had expected of a millionaire's wife. Instead, she carried herself with quiet grace, her face pale from fatigue but softened with a tenderness he couldn't reconcile with Adrian's description of her. She lingered with the servants, thanking them with genuine warmth, sometimes pressing folded bills into their hands when she thought no one was watching. One afternoon, while Daniel kept his distance from the gates, he saw a child trip and fall on the sidewalk. Before the nanny could react, Elena, heavily pregnant and delicate, hurried out, kneeling despite her condition to help the boy up. Her voice was soothing, her touch careful, as if her own pain meant nothing compared to the tears of a stranger's child. The boy smiled through his sniffles, and Elena returned inside with a grace Daniel hadn't expected. He had imagined a spoiled woman pampered by wealth, but what he saw unsettled him. She seemed like someone imprisoned in luxury, surviving more than living. And in her every gesture of kindness, Daniel found himself seeing the opposite of Adrian's portrait of her. Adrian had painted her as manipulative, fragile, and undeserving of mercy. Yet the truth playing before Daniel's eyes was a woman with strength wrapped in gentleness, a woman already enduring a life that felt like punishment. That night, as he wrote down her routines, her morning walks in the garden, her evenings spent in solitude, Daniel felt unease gnawing at him. For the first time in years, the hitman questioned not his ability to kill, but the reason behind the order. Daniel sat at the edge of his bed in the dim light of his rented apartment, the gun laid out before him like a question demanding an answer. The job should have been simple: wait, strike, vanish. He had done it countless times, and money had always been enough to silence the whispers of conscience. But now those whispers grew louder each time he saw Elena's face. He had shadowed her long enough to know her schedule: morning tea at the sunlit balcony, quiet afternoons in the library, evening walks in the garden where her hand always rested protectively over her stomach. He knew the exact moments when she was vulnerable, when he could take her life without anyone seeing. And yet, every time his finger inched toward the trigger, something inside him recoiled. It wasn't weakness, at least that's what he told himself. It was memory. He couldn't look at Elena without being pulled back into the battlefield haze of another lifetime, another woman. His wife. She had been carrying their child when a mortar strike ended everything in an instant. The smell of smoke, the weight of her body in his arms, the silence where laughter should have been, it all returned whenever he looked at Elena's swollen belly. She was not his wife, but her fragility, her determination to protect the life inside her, mirrored the woman he had loved and lost. The ghosts he carried clawed their way to the surface every time he saw her smile faintly through her sorrow. Adrian's instructions echoed coldly in his mind. Make it clean. No loose ends. Daniel imagined the millionaire's smirk, his careless dismissal of both wife and child as though they were numbers on a ledger. That arrogance, that emptiness, it filled Daniel with something he hadn't felt in years. Not guilt. Not hesitation. Rage. So when Adrian called, demanding updates, Daniel lied easily. "She's cautious," he said in his graveled voice. "I need more time. Studying her patterns." It was enough to pacify him for now. But Daniel wasn't stalling for logistics. He was stalling because his instincts screamed at him that this wasn't just another job. This was a test of the man he had become, the man he wanted to be. He poured another drink, staring at the weapon lying before him. For the first time in years, Daniel Kane wasn't sure he could pull the trigger. Elena sat by the window of her bedroom, the evening light washing over her face in soft gold. The mansion was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that echoed like loneliness rather than peace. She traced small circles over her stomach, whispering promises to the life growing inside her. "You will be loved," she murmured, her voice trembling as though she needed the reassurance as much as the child did. She had everything money could buy: silks, jewels, servants at her command, yet all of it felt hollow. What she wanted most was affection, a tender glance, a husband who saw her as more than a possession. Adrian gave her none of that. Every day felt like a battle fought in silence. Adrian's words were often sharp, his indifference sharper still. He didn't yell, he dismissed. He didn't argue, he ignored. That cold distance stung more than cruelty ever could. Elena had learned to swallow her tears, to mask her pain behind small smiles at dinner parties, to endure the whispers of women who envied her life but never saw the prison she lived in. She noticed him sometimes, the stranger lingering at the edges of her world. A tall man with eyes that lingered too long, standing across the street as if he belonged nowhere but always returned. At first, she felt a ripple of unease, but it surprised her that fear never fully took root. There was something in the way he watched her, not predatory but cautious, almost protective. It was as though he was measuring her, not waiting for her to fall. One afternoon, as she rested in the garden, she felt his gaze again from beyond the gates. Instead of alarm, a strange calm settled over her. For reasons she couldn't explain, Elena felt safer knowing he was there, though she did not know why. Perhaps it was her intuition, sharpened by years of quiet suffering, that whispered he was not her enemy. Still, she couldn't shake the unease of her situation. She lived with a husband who felt like a stranger and carried a child whose future seemed uncertain. The world believed she was blessed, but inside she was breaking, clinging only to her unborn child, her last anchor of hope. Daniel sat across from Adrian in the shadowed corner of a high-end restaurant, the kind of place where business transactions wore the disguise of polite conversation. The clink of cutlery and the low hum of chatter filled the air, but at their table, the atmosphere was taut, sharp as a blade. Adrian leaned forward, his eyes cold, his voice low enough that only Daniel could hear. "It's been weeks. I don't pay for hesitation, Kane. I pay for results." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had expected this confrontation sooner or later. Still, he kept his tone even, detached, the way killers were supposed to sound. Jobs like this don't happen overnight. Timing has to be right. One wrong move, and suspicion falls. You wanted clean, remember? Adrian sneered, swirling the wine in his glass as if the thought of waiting insulted him. Clean, yes. But not endless delays. She's fragile, always has been. It shouldn't be difficult. You take her out, and the problem disappears. His words were casual, as though he were discussing a broken vase or an unwanted dog. That chill in his tone made Daniel's stomach knot. So he pressed, not out of curiosity, but to hear the truth laid bare. Why her? Daniel asked, his eyes locking on Adrian's. She's your wife. She's carrying your child. Men like you usually want heirs, legacies. What's the gain in killing them? Adrian smirked, as if Daniel had asked something foolish. An heir? Don't make me laugh. A child is nothing but noise, need, distraction. My empire requires focus, and he paused, his lip curling. She was never more than a convenient choice. Beautiful, yes, but weak. She clings, she whines, she drains. And now she brings me this liability. I don't want a legacy that ties me down. I want freedom. And I'll buy it with her death. The words hung heavy, every syllable dripping with venom. For Daniel, it was the breaking point. He had seen men justify atrocities before, but never with such cold arrogance. In Adrian's voice, there was no regret, no conflict, only greed, only selfishness. Daniel leaned back, nodding slowly, masking the storm inside him. Outwardly, he was still the hitman for hire. Inwardly, he knew, he would never kill Elena. But if Adrian realized that truth, Daniel would be the next target. The game had changed. The night rain lashed against the mansion windows, thunder rolling across the sky like a warning. Adrian's temper had grown short, his calls sharper, his voice carrying the impatience of a man used to obedience. Daniel could feel the walls closing in on him. Each excuse he offered bought less time than the last. He knew the window for delay was closing, and soon Adrian would demand blood, not explanations. That evening, Daniel slipped through the gardens, blending with the shadows, until he found Elena sitting under the veranda, her hands folded gently over her stomach. The storm winds tugged at her hair, but she seemed lost in thought, staring at the restless sky. For a long moment, he simply stood there, hidden in the dark, watching her. She looked so fragile, yet there was a strength in her stillness, a quiet resilience that reminded him of all he had lost. Finally, he stepped closer, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. Elena turned, startled but not frightened, her eyes locking with his. Something unspoken passed between them. Her instinct told her this was the man who had been watching, and his silence confirmed it. Daniel's voice, low and graveled, broke the air. Be careful who you trust. Danger is closer than you think. Her lips parted, confusion flickering across her face. What do you mean? She whispered. But Daniel shook his head. He couldn't say more, not yet. To reveal the truth outright would put her in even greater danger. Instead, he left those words to linger, to root themselves in her mind like a seed of dread. That same night, Adrian's fury spilled through the phone. Enough delays, Kane. Tomorrow. No more excuses. The order was final, the deadline set. But Daniel's decision crystallized then and there. He could not kill her. He would not. Instead of carrying out Adrian's command, he vowed to turn his weapon against the one who had given it. For the first time in years, Daniel felt a cause greater than money, greater than survival. He would not be Elena's executioner. He would be her shield. Daniel moved like a shadow through the mansion that night, every sense sharpened by urgency. Adrian was away at a late business meeting, and the household staff had long since retired to their quarters. The corridors smelled of polished wood and silence, each creak of the floorboards threatening to betray him. He found Elena in her room, sitting at the edge of her bed with a small suitcase half-packed at her feet. She looked up at him, fear flashing across her face, but it was quickly replaced by something else, recognition. She had known he would come. "You're him," she whispered, her hand instinctively pressing against her stomach. "The one watching me." Daniel didn't deny it. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "Your husband hired me. He wants you gone. But I won't do it. I'm here to get you out before he finds another man who will." For a moment, Elena's breath caught in her throat, her world tilting as the pieces of her unease finally locked into place. The distance in Adrian's eyes, his cold indifference, the weight of his disdain, it all led to this. She should have broken, but instead, she straightened, her eyes shining with tears and determination. "Then help me," she said simply. Daniel guided her through the service halls, down the narrow staircase used by servants, and out into the stormy night. The gates loomed like barriers of iron fate, but he knew the blind spots in the security system, the quiet gaps in the patrols. By the time they reached his car, both were soaked from the rain, but Elena did not complain. She clutched her suitcase and held her belly, moving with the quiet resolve of someone who had endured far worse. The safe house he brought her to was far from the glittering world she had known. A run-down cabin at the edge of the city, the air thick with damp wood and dust. Yet when she stepped inside, she exhaled as though she could finally breathe. Daniel watched her, the guilt heavy on his shoulders. "You should hate me," he admitted. "I came here to kill you." Elena shook her head, her voice soft but unwavering. "But you didn't. That's what matters." Something shifted between them then, unspoken but undeniable. They were no longer hunter and prey, but two souls bound by survival, both carrying scars the world couldn't see. Adrian's fury erupted the moment he returned to the empty mansion and discovered Elena's absence. The untouched dinner table, the silence in her chambers, the suitcase missing from the corner, each detail struck him like a personal insult. His rage was volcanic, his voice echoing through the halls as he barked orders at servants who knew nothing. "Find her!" he roared, overturning a chair in his study. But deep down, he already suspected who had betrayed him. Selina was there, draped across the leather sofa, sipping wine as though chaos were entertainment. Her eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "You trusted a killer to do your bidding," she said smoothly. "What did you expect? Loyalty? Conscience? He's played you, Adrian. And now he has her." Her words stoked the fire burning inside him. The humiliation was unbearable. Adrian Blackwood, master of empires, deceived in his own home. It wasn't just about Elena anymore. It was about control, about dominance. No one escaped him. No one betrayed him. And certainly no woman defied him without paying the price. He slammed his fist against the desk, the sound cracking through the room. "If she thinks she can run, she's wrong. If he thinks he can steal from me, he's dead." His voice was low, venomous, every syllable laced with the promise of vengeance. Selina leaned closer, her hand trailing along his arm. "Then crush them. Use what you have. You own half this city. Money buys loyalty, power buys silence. Make them disappear. Both of them." Her tone was silk over steel, feeding his rage, sharpening it. Adrian wasted no time. Within hours, he had men on the streets, mercenaries, private investigators, men who owed him favors too costly to refuse. Photographs of Elena and Daniel were passed around, their names whispered in backrooms and alleys. His wealth was a weapon, and he wielded it without restraint. Yet beneath his fury, another truth festered: he would rather see Elena dead than free. The idea of her living without him, carrying his child into a world where he had no control, was intolerable. His obsession grew into something darker than hate. It was possession. She was his, even in death. And so Adrian swore that no matter how far Daniel ran, no matter where Elena hid, his shadow would find them. The warehouse was cold, its broken windows rattling in the night wind, moonlight spilling through in fractured beams. Daniel had chosen it as a last stand, knowing Adrian's reach was too long for hiding forever. Elena sat in the corner, clutching her stomach, her face pale but steady, her eyes never leaving him. She knew what was coming. He had promised to protect her, but even promises trembled beneath the weight of Adrian Blackwood's wrath. The sound of engines shattered the silence. Headlights cut across the dark, followed by the heavy tread of boots. Adrian arrived with men armed to the teeth, their weapons gleaming beneath the harsh glow of flashlights. He stepped inside like a king entering his throne room, his tailored coat untouched by the night, his smile sharp as a blade. "Well," Adrian drawled, his voice echoing. "The traitor and the whore. How touching." His gaze swept over Elena, then Daniel, the hatred in his eyes mingled with arrogance. "Did you really think you could steal from me? Did you think you could make a fool of Adrian Blackwood?" Daniel raised his gun, his body taut with readiness. "This ends tonight." Adrian laughed, the sound cruel, mocking. "You were paid to kill her, Cain. That's what you are, a tool. And now, you've deluded yourself into thinking you're her savior? Pathetic. She was never more than an inconvenience, and that child," he sneered, glancing at Elena's belly. "That child is nothing." Elena's tears brimmed, but she stood, her voice breaking yet defiant. "You'll never own me again, Adrian. Not me, not my baby." The standoff exploded into violence. Adrian's men surged forward, gunfire crackling through the warehouse. Daniel moved like a predator unleashed, each shot precise, each strike fueled by something deeper than duty. He fought with the desperation of a man who had lost everything once and refused to lose again. Bodies fell, the air thick with smoke and echoes of violence. At last, it was just Adrian and Daniel, circling each other amidst the ruin. Adrian's fury twisted his face as he raised his gun, but Daniel was faster. In seconds, Adrian was disarmed, on his knees, staring up at the man who had undone him. Daniel's gun hovered at Adrian's temple, his finger tense on the trigger. But he stopped. Killing him would make him no better. Instead, Daniel revealed the recorder tucked in his pocket, Adrian's confession, every damning word captured. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Adrian's empire was crumbling, and he could do nothing to stop it. The sirens grew louder, their wail cutting through the night until red and blue lights painted the warehouse walls. Adrian was dragged away in handcuffs, cursing, spitting venom, his voice breaking with rage as he shouted threats no one believed anymore. The great Adrian Blackwood, once untouchable, now reduced to a desperate man clinging to words as his power slipped from his grasp. Selina had vanished the moment things turned sour, leaving him to face ruin alone. Elena stood trembling in the aftermath, leaning against a pillar for strength, her hand pressed protectively to her stomach. The world she had known, its silks, chandeliers, and suffocating coldness, was gone. In its place stood uncertainty, but also something new, freedom. Her eyes found Daniel across the wreckage. He was battered, streaked with blood and ash, but alive. He had chosen to save her when he could have destroyed her, and that choice meant everything. Weeks later, as winter softened into spring, Elena gave birth to a healthy baby. The cries of the child filled the small hospital room, a sound that carried hope into every corner of her being. She wept as she held the tiny bundle, whispering promises of love, of safety, of a life far brighter than the one she had endured. This child was no burden, no liability. It was her salvation. Daniel visited once, standing awkwardly in the doorway, his presence larger than life yet humble. He looked at the baby, then at Elena, and for a moment something warm flickered across his scarred features. She reached for his hand, whispering, "You saved us. You saved me." But Daniel only shook his head, his voice quiet, heavy with truth. "No. You saved yourself. I just made sure you had the chance." Then, with a soldier's silence, he left, disappearing into the world like a shadow fading at dawn. Elena never saw him again, but she carried his memory like a quiet flame. He had given her back her life, and though their paths had parted, his choice had rewritten her fate. Justice had been served, freedom was hers, and a new chapter had begun.